Given WWE is a global conglomerate, they take pride in the product they put out. Still, they tend to slip up, and when that happens, WWE have ended up embarrassing themselves. This is Wrestling Up, and here are 10 matches that embarrassed WWE. Before we get into the rest of the video, make sure you subscribe to Wrestling Hub and turn on all notifications to stay up to date with everything in the world of pro wrestling. Also, don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Wrestling Hub Official, and also follow us on Twitter at Wrestling_Hub. In the early 2000s, Goldberg was in WWE for only a year, and Brock Lesnar was finishing up his first run looking to try out for the NFL. When the time came for the two behemoths to face, it was at WrestleMania. Both were set to leave the company the next day. Somehow, this information had leaked to the public, and everyone in attendance knew. Whereas Goldberg was supposed to be the face in the encounter, they were both booed. WWE knew that something like this could happen, so they had Stone Cold Steve Austin be the referee. Unfortunately, that did not stop the fans from booing the two. WWE was embarrassed with what happened, although they saved dignity with Stone Cold stunning Goldberg and Lesnar. Undertaker was in a feud with the $1 Million Man and his corporation in '94. He needed new opponents as DiBiase and his faction had a lot of heels. DiBiase started off the feud by claiming the dead man was working for him. The big reveal then showed a fake Undertaker. This was after Taker had disappeared after losing a casket match to Yokozuna at the Royal Rumble. DiBiase's claim was that he had convinced Taker to come back with money and had included him in the faction instead of the urn that Paul Bearer brought to the ring with him. Meanwhile, Bearer made contact with the real Undertaker and produced him at SummerSlam '94. The two faced off with the real Undertaker winning. Brian Lee, the fake Taker, was rolled into a casket. The idea had originally been for Undertaker to face fake Undertaker even more after, but the idea was dropped because of the quality of Lee's wrestling. While Undertaker was good, having to follow Bret and Owen Hart's battle for the WWE Championship exposed Lee, and in the end, the entire angle was dropped. Everyone was more than happy to see Jerry the King Lawler make his stand at the WWE title against The Miz in 2010. However, watching him face off against fellow commentator Michael Cole in 3 consecutive pay-per-view matches in 2011 was not pleasant. Lawler is easily recognized as a legend, but this match was just way outside his comfort zone. As for Michael Cole, he did not know what he was doing inside the ring. If the WrestleMania 27 match was shorter, maybe it would have been bearable, but it was 10 minutes too long. WWE may as well have been blind to Cole. Sure, he was a great heel commentator, but he wasn't a trained pro wrestler. Fans were put through other gimmicks like a country whipping match at Extreme Rules and a Kiss My Foot calamity at Over the Limit. To make matters worse, Jim Ross and Bret Hart were put into a rivalry that needed to be done away with rather than adding more moving parts. It was really strange for WWE to build this to be some big grudge match. At this time, Cole was working on his heel gimmick and started having childish fights on the mic instead of calling the match. To make the match look special, Steve Austin was called to be the special guest referee. In this episode of Raw, it was just a little off for Cole to hurl mean jibes at Lawler about the passing of his mother, especially when this feud was focused around Mike getting spanked with a belt by JR or swallowing Lawler's feet. When the match actually started, everyone realized it was not going to be a good one, with Lawler submitting Cole to win this mess. When Hulk Hogan returned to WWE, it was thought it would be the perfect time for a match between him and Shawn Michaels. Both were often called the greatest of all time by different fans. WWE came up with an idea for a trilogy between the two. The first would see Hogan win, while Michaels would get a win in the second, and finally the third match would decide their feud. However, just before their initial match, Hogan would bring up his injury to his back and would say while he could wrestle against Michaels in the first bout, he would not wrestle in any of the others. Michaels was naturally furious, so when Hulk Hogan hit him in the ring, he didn't no-sell the moves like many other wrestlers in his position might have. He oversold them. He took a boot from Hogan, fell down, then ran around wobbling before falling down again. He sold each move like he was dying. Being kicked on the top of the turnbuckle, he flopped all over the place. Those backstage were definitely embarrassed at how the proposed dream match at SummerSlam 2005 turned out. We were going to do a best of 3 and in the last minute, Hogan backed out. So that day, and I will admit this, I poked the bear all day. I already knew what I was going to do. I was going to go out there and do business, but I was going to make him earn it, just to be a pain in the butt all day. And that was something I did just for my own enjoyment. There are probably tons of worse matches that could have happened on July 2nd, 2001 on Raw. Nonetheless, no excuses can be made to cover up just how bad Booker T vs. Buff Bagwell was. WWE had made the news because they had purchased WCW just 3 months before this fateful match. This was the first chance where the WCW guys found themselves having access to the main event spot on Raw. Now it was on their shoulders to put on a show that everyone would talk about. WWE slapped the WCW logo on the Titantron and the ring skirt. The announce table was even staffed with WCW people. With all these big plans, no one can understand why Bagwell was chosen for this bout. Everyone knows Booker T is an amazing wrestler, but Bagwell was average. It didn't take long for fans to turn on this mess. Both ended up getting booed, and Booker had to endure the very first boring chant of his career. Booker can't be blamed entirely. Most of the WCW guys ended up getting buried by WWE stars. Booker was retained and went on to have an incredibly successful career. Bagwell was fired the next week. Triple H vs. Scott Steiner at the 03 Royal Rumble was a massive joke. These two launched into a series of macho challenges, which included arm wrestling, bench press, and ended with an oiled-up bodybuilding pose-off. At this time, Steiner was suffering from drop foot syndrome. This basically meant he was partially paralyzed in one of his feet. Now, WWE could have put in some effort into hiding his injury, but they put him against Triple H in an 18-minute match. Triple H was recovering from a partially torn quad muscle. Steiner was winded minutes in and messed up several moves, including a double underarm suplex. Then Triple H finished the match by hitting Steiner with a sledgehammer, which caused a disqualification. The two were pit against each other again at the next pay-per-view. Sadly, by then, WWE was ready to be done. Steiner was sent down to wallow in the mid-card until he eventually quit. Steiner has openly said it was the worst place he ever worked, and that he doesn't know any two bigger douchebags than Triple H and Stephanie. Eric Bischoff and Teddy Long are veterans of the wrestling industry, but they are mainly known for their authority roles. Thus, when a match was made between the two, it was bound to be bad. It was scheduled for Survivor Series. They didn't manage to get in a headlock or even land a punch or kick. They were lost out there, but on top of that, it was made even worse when the Boogeyman made a random appearance. Undertaker vs. Goldberg was a dream match since the days of WWE and WCW. During Goldberg's initial WWE run, he did not face Taker. However, Goldberg came back and hopes were reignited. At Super Showdown, the two tried to deliver a dream match almost 2 decades after its appeal faded. Goldberg concussed himself early on and dropped Undertaker on his head. Taker tried to get Goldberg up for a pile driver, but the star was so out of it that he didn't accommodate the lift and both men fell. Finally, Taker delivered the world's most disappointing chokeslam, where Goldberg hardly left the ground, before the match ended with Taker looking disappointed. It was the match that made Taker decide that he had to have a better way of retiring. It was an embarrassment, and called by many one of the worst matches of all time. It's almost impossible to imagine that adults sat in a room and talked this match into existence. Two Hall of Famers, Pat Patterson and Gerald Briscoe, were 59 and 55. They had come up with and helped book some of the most successful angles. Then WWE decided that Pat and Briscoe would don evening gowns and wrestle in a hardcore match. The match was for comedic purposes, obviously, but the intended audience for this match was one person only, Vince McMahon. During the bout, as if the concept was not bad enough, Patterson shoved a banana down Briscoe's throat, accompanied by a maxi pad. Briscoe would then hit a Bronco Buster. It was horrible. The commentary team didn't know what to say, and the crowd hated it. Chants of boring rang out, as this is another low point for WWE. The Royal Rumble in 2014 was a slap in the face to fans. WWE claims they know what fans want, and if that's the case, they deliberately did the opposite in this pay-per-view. Daniel Bryan was the hottest star. Chants were reaching a fever pitch and fans were expecting Bryan to be entering the Rumble and winning. He was not injured, and there was no reason for him to not be in that match. Thus, when the 30th entrant was revealed to be Rey Mysterio, the boos of fans rained down. They made an uneasy peace with the decision and instead focused on Roman Reigns, who was yet to be as hated, hoping he would win the Rumble. Instead, the newly returned Batista tore through the field and won it. The winner was back from a long return, but he was booed out of the building. Eventually, WWE were forced to put Bryan in the main event of WrestleMania anyway, but it took the displeasure of fans. And these were 10 matches that embarrassed WWE. I hope you're all having a great day. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you later.